the MOP, the unsexily named GBU-57, is essentially a very large, 6 meters long, which is why you need a US B-2 bomber to carry it. Hardened, it's sort of reinforced steel with a very large warhead, and the way that it works is that it is strong enough to be dropped through concrete, lots of earth, possibly rock, and effectively the force of it dropping from such a great altitude burrows through the rock, and then the fuse detonates after a delay, so it detonates inside the target. It's worth noting it's never been used in anger. Nobody really knows how far it can penetrate. Generally, when people are talking about it, they say, well, you might need 2 or 3.
Keir Starmer has chaired an emergency Cobra meeting today after concerns the US is considering an attack on Iran. Donald Trump has said he's not decided whether to strike nuclear facilities when speaking to reporters earlier.
Will you strike the Iranian nuclear component? And what time exactly, sir? Sir, would you strike it? Would you please inform us so we can be there and watch? I mean, you don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that Iran's got a lot of trouble, and they want to negotiate. And I said, why didn't you negotiate with me before? All this death and destruction. Why didn't you negotiate? I said to the people, why didn't you negotiate with me 2 weeks ago? You could have done fine. You would have had a country.
Yeah, keeping everyone guessing. Nobody knows what I'm going to do from Donald Trump there. Iran has today warned that any US involvement would be a recipe for an all-out war in the Middle East. Well, joining me in the studio is Matthew Savill, who is Director of Military Sciences at RUSI, that's the Royal United Services Institute. Good evening to you, Matthew.
Good evening.
Gosh, it feels like we're at a very pivotal time in this conflict. We've seen much of the intense action over the last 5 days or so, and of course things could ramp up significantly if the United States is to get involved. What are the options in front of Donald Trump right now?
I mean, there's quite a broad range in terms of things that they could do, and they've been moving some more military forces into the region. But the reason why we're having this debate now is actually about a very specific capability that the US has that the Israelis don't. And this all focuses on one of the Iranian nuclear facilities, which is deep buried under a mountain, Fordow. And it's essentially under, tens, if not hundreds of meters of rock and reinforced concrete. And the Israelis don't have a weapon that can penetrate through that much rock. So they can't guarantee destroying the facility. It's a centrifuge facility, so it enriches uranium, which is the material that the Iranians would use if they were to put together a nuclear weapon. The Israelis could attack the facility and try and cut it off. There's some speculation that they could try some kind of daring commando raid or a ground operation. But as everyone has looked at this over the years, it has always come back to the Americans have a very large bomb that only they have, that only they could drop.
It's called the bunker buster, isn't it? The GBU-57. It's called MOP. The Massive Ordnance Penetrator, which just sounds a little bit wrong when you read it out like that, doesn't it? But as you say, it's the only thing capable of reaching Iran's underground facilities. We were speaking to the national security correspondent at Reuters earlier, based at the Pentagon, and he was saying, look, the Americans could get involved by using that to destroy the entrance to that facility in that mountain. It's part of a mountain range, isn't it? Or the exit. He said, but actually, the only way to ensure that it does what it needs to do is to completely flatten it. So we would have to see kind of all-out destruction. And if we saw that, and we may see that before we have the confirmation from Donald Trump that the US are involved, that's our clue, isn't it, effectively?
Well, yes. And there's a question of what you would see. So there are lots of conventional these are all conventional weapons. None of these are nuclear weapons, I should say. The MOP, the unsexily named GBU-57, is essentially a very large, 6 meters long, which is why you need a US B-2 bomber to carry it. Hardened, it's sort of reinforced steel with a very large warhead. And the way that it works is that it is strong enough to be dropped through concrete, lots of earth, possibly rock. And effectively, the force of it dropping from such a great altitude burrows through the rock, and then the fuse detonates after a delay. So it detonates inside the target. It's worth noting it's never been used in anger. Nobody really knows how far it can penetrate. Generally, when people are talking about it, they say, well, you might need 2 or 3.
So it might not work upon first strike.
You would use several. So
Okay.
I think
All at once.
A B2 can carry 2.
Okay.
So you would probably use. I mean, if you're trying to increase your chances, you would probably have several US bombers dropping several of these on a very precise location. There is, of course, an enormous caveat to all of this, which is that we're all assuming the destruction of Fordo ends the Iranian nuclear program. What we don't know, and what the IAEA don't know, because the Iranians have stopped giving them access, is what have the Iranians done with the enriched uranium that they already have? Have they already started doing some work on weaponization? You don't need a huge facility. You don't need tons and tons and tons of highly enriched uranium. It's some kilos that you could do somewhere. And of course, the Israelis have claimed, though without evidence thus far, that they had detected new work by the Iranians moving towards weaponization. So destroying Fordow removes the most heavily defended centrifuge and enrichment facility that we know of. It's not actually a guarantee to the end of the nuclear program.
Interesting indeed. So that is one consideration. That is the most sort of pictorial, the most obvious one. And am I right in saying that, look, Donald Trump may be keeping us guessing, because actually what sometimes happens, and we've seen this historically, the action happens first, and then we get the confirmation that the US is involved. That happened, didn't it? In terms of, I think it was the Houthi attacks, or maybe Hezbollah. But anyway, that would be the norm. Why on earth would he tell us this is going to happen before it happens?
His allies would say he's unpredictable, and that helps US policy. It helps create uncertainty and deterrence. I'm not sure there's any real evidence for that, because it appears to be the case that some people therefore take additional risks because they're either fatalistic about what he's going to do, or it's too difficult to predict. I would say it looks like he is leaning towards military action, having been very sceptical, but it's very possible he hasn't yet made up his mind. I would also say that there is a slight divergence here, potentially in the US and Israeli positions, which is that he talks for all the world as if he does still want to deal, but he is quite happy to see force bringing the Iranians back to the table. I don't think Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is very interested in a deal. And so there could be tension down the line between Trump and Netanyahu.
And there's a political motivation here for the Israeli Prime Minister as well. We just on that point, we spoke to a lady called Abigail Cohen, who is in her bunker at the time. She lives in the suburbs of Tel Aviv. We spoke to her on Monday or Tuesday of this week, and she said, in fact, it was Monday. And I asked her how she felt about Israel, going on the attack against Iran. And she said, relieved. She said, this has been coming for such a long time. She said, I actually feel relief that this is now happening, that this threat is now being addressed. And it's expected that the Israeli Prime Minister will have a spike in popularity as a result of this, with other Israeli citizens potentially arguing the same as our guest, who is not a fan of war, not necessarily a complete fan of the Prime Minister, but just said, look, this is good for us, even as she sat in her bunker. So some interesting optics there. Let's talk a little bit about UK involvement in this, shall we? What are the options here? When we talk about UK involvement, this is what's been, war game to a certain extent. If the US asks the UK for help, will we give it? That was the big whiteboard question in the Cabinet Office today at that Cobra meeting. What are the options for the UK?
Well, first of all, there's an enabling question. So if we're back to the question of B-2s using this very large bomb.
Yeah, so these are B-2 warplanes.
Big, long range, the stealth bomber that everyone knows about, which is quite old now, and there's a replacement coming in, but they're still very effective. There's a question from where would they be launched? And this is where you get to Diego Garcia, which is, of course, a largely a US facility, but inside a UK facility in the British Indian Ocean Territory, as it's called.
Yeah, and the Chagos Islands.
Indeed. And if the US wanted to launch from there, and there have been B-2s there, indeed there were some there up until early May, as part of what was seen then as US signalling, the US would normally, I don't know the exact details of the arrangements, but normally militaries have a series of things that they refer to as access basing and overflight permissions, which is who do you ask for permission to fly over someone's territory, who do you ask for permission to use their basing, who do you ask for access. And the normal rules would be if you're launching a military operation from a base on somebody else's territory, you have to seek their permission.
Yeah.
So it could be that the UK is simply asked, can we fly the B-2s from Diego Garcia? That doesn't have to be the case. The B-2 has an astonishingly long range. They could just be flown from their base in the US to Iran and get refueled somewhere along the way or on the way back. So it doesn't have to be that they're launched from Diego Garcia. So the first thing is we could provide basing.
Yeah.
Some US aircraft might also fly from RAF Akrotiri on Cyprus. So again, it wouldn't really be the B-2s, but like other aircraft that might be used. Then there's the question of what are we doing with our forces in the region? And the Prime Minister has announced we've sent more combat aircraft to Cyprus. I think it's worth noting here, I suspect most of this is defensive about UK forces and interests already in the region and protecting our facilities, particularly given the Iranian threats to retaliate against other people in the region if they think they help the Israelis. And that's because lots of UK facilities are in range of UK cruise missiles, drones and ballistic missiles. And we also have UK personnel at coalition bases or co-located with US bases who could be caught in the crossfire. Okay.
So we need to be very aware of that. You were a senior policy advisor in government on Iran. Do we need to start talking about the threat domestically to us? We've seen Iran linked, instructed attacks on home soil. I'm thinking about Puriya Zarati, the Iranian TV journalist who was attacked outside his home in London, worked for Iranian TV here in the UK, but other instances as well. Do we need and will the government be thinking about that too, or is that too far removed?
Oh, I mean, I am sure that the government has already been thinking about possible Iranian activity overseas. So, part of effectively the shadow war that the Iranians have been fighting with Israel for decades has involved overseas attacks. There's famously been, I think it was an attack on a bus I want to say Hungary a few years ago, an attack on the Israeli embassy in, I think, Venezuela. They have threatened dissidents and journalists, as you mentioned, in the UK and in Europe, plots in the US, including one famously that was allegedly, I mean, it sounded very amateur hour, but to kill Donald Trump. So they have an intelligence network, and that will already be something that the UK government, I'm certain, is looking at under the various euphemisms, but things like hostile state activity or state threats.
And heightened surveillance as well,
Absolutely.
Probably.
So, the police, the UK security service, all of these kind of things will be looking at potential Iranian activity and retaliation. So that will already be in hand. I think the current focus is more on the possibility of attacks in and around the Middle East that could threaten UK personnel. Diego Garcia is too far away for them, but we have facilities in Bahrain, we have people alongside the Americans in Qatar, and a few other places. And the challenge there would be we don't have anything that is, essentially a ballistic missile defense system. So we'd be reliant if we were near American forces who have Patriot. Our combat aircraft could be used to shoot down drones or cruise missiles, that sort of thing. Okay.
We must leave it there for time, but it's been so fascinating speaking to you. I feel like we've got a really good understanding now of some of the weaponry involved, but also some of the understanding that we need across what Keir Starmer will be weighing up, what Donald Trump will be weighing up, and where this might go next. Matthew Savill, great pleasure to speak to you. Thank you. Director of Military Sciences at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute. Good to see you.